Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it loud enough that the whole table heard her. It was after work, a casual Friday gathering, the kind she insisted we attend because it's good for visibility. She had a Starbucks cup in her hand, even though the bar had its own drinks. It was her little shield, the same one she used every morning while scrolling through her iPhone instead of talking to me. She laughed, almost performing for the group, and said she needed a new marriage because this one's trash. The people around us froze just long enough to hear my breath stop. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I didn't even smile until the moment felt heavy enough to snap. And then I reached into my bag and handed her the already signed papers. No one expected that. Not her, not the coworkers pretending not to stare, and definitely not Adam, my so-called friend, standing just behind her shoulder. He tried to act confused, but his eyes gave him away. They moved too quickly, the way they always did when someone's been caught before they're exposed. I had prepared this moment quietly, the way I handle most things. She treated our life like those bulk runs to Costco, stacking everything without looking closely at what was actually breaking. I had stopped being a person and become one more item on her list, something she grabbed without noticing the expiration date. The air tightened around us, and she whispered, asking what the papers were. Adam shifted back like someone fading behind a curtain. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I just said that we finally agreed on something. Her joke was supposed to make her look bold, clever, untouchable. Instead, it exposed everything I'd known but hadn't voiced. She kept waiting for me to take it back, to chase, to soften. That was the role she'd assigned me. Reliable, predictable, harmless. But something in her face faltered when I didn't fill the silence for her. When I didn't rush in to fix the discomfort she created. When I simply stood there, calm, letting the weight of her own words settle on her. That was the first moment she realized I wasn't playing along anymore. I didn't go home after that night. I drove the Toyota Camry out of the parking lot without checking the rearview mirror, letting the quiet of the road settle the parts of me that had been vibrating for months. She didn't call. She didn't text. She was waiting for me to calm down, to return to the rhythm she'd grown comfortable directing. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was studying the silence the way I study numbers, patiently, until patterns emerge. The first shift came early the next morning. A coworker named Melissa, someone who normally kept to herself, pulled me aside in the office hallway. She didn't say anything directly, but her tone carried meaning. She said she'd seen Adam leaving our house late more than once. She said she always assumed we were hosting game nights or work sessions. But the way she said it, the way her voice lowered at the end, made it clear she no longer believed that. She didn't accuse them, and she didn't comfort me. She simply placed the information between us and walked away. That stillness, that lack of commentary, told me more than any confrontation could. I remember standing there under the office lights, letting her words fall into place. I didn't chase her for more details. I didn't demand proof. People reveal truth in their hesitation, not their declarations. I logged the moment exactly the way I log data in a spreadsheet. Clean, precise, final. When I got home that evening, she was curled up on the couch watching something on Hulu, using the glow of the screen as a barrier. She asked, without taking her eyes off the show, if I planned on pretending last night didn't happen. She said it lightly, like the joke still worked. I didn't respond. I just watched the way she avoided my face, how she kept clutching her iPhone as if it could redirect the conversation somewhere safer for her. She didn't notice the way my expression changed. She didn't know the shift had already begun. I was pulling back, not dramatically, not with a fight, but with a clarity that doesn't announce itself. It just moves. And she didn't see it. Not then, not yet. I started noticing things in the same way I notice outliers in a data set. Small, quiet, but impossible to ignore once they appear in sequence. It began with a notification she forgot to hide. She left her iPhone face up on the kitchen counter while rushing to grab a jacket. A message preview flashed for half a second, just long enough for me to recognize Adam's tone even without seeing his name. It wasn't explicit. It didn't have to be. Familiarity has a shape, and that message fit it too neatly. I didn't pick up her phone. I didn't scroll. I didn't need to. People in panic erase things. People in comfort get careless. That alone told me which stage they were in. Later that night, while she disappeared into another binge on Hulu, I opened my laptop. Not to search for answers, but to confirm patterns. The first confirmation came from Facebook Marketplace. I had listed an old shelf there months ago, and the app kept a log of messages tied to my account. I noticed a chat thread I hadn't opened before. It wasn't mine. It was hers, using my login because she'd once said it was easier that way. I clicked it. The thread wasn't romantic, but the timestamps lined up with nights she claimed she'd worked late with Adam. They'd coordinated pickups that never happened, meaning the messages had been a cover, a harmless explanation in case anyone looked. I closed the laptop calmly. No anger, no spike of adrenaline. Just the confirmation that quiet suspicion had become solid structure. The next morning, she did her usual ritual, Starbucks in one hand, scrolling with the other, barely acknowledging me as I got ready for work. She commented on how tired I looked, as if she wasn't the one draining the room every time she opened her mouth. She didn't notice I stopped giving her any reactions at all. After work, I drove to Home Depot under the pretense of picking up supplies for a project. I walked the aisles without touching anything, letting the stillness settle. This was the part she would never see, the part where men like me don't explode. We calibrate. We measure. We reposition. By the time I left the store, the evidence wasn't just digital. It was behavioral. It was consistent. It was enough. The disappearance started long before she realized it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of shift you only notice once the room goes cold and you can't remember when the warmth left. I stopped reacting. I stopped offering explanations. I stopped filling the space she used to take for granted. Every move was deliberate, measured, rehearsed in silence while she sat on the couch watching Hulu, trusting the glow to keep her safe from real conversations. I waited for a morning when her routine was predictable. She left early for a team training session, Starbucks cup in hand, rushing toward her car with that practiced urgency HR people use when they need to look important. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in years the house felt like mine. Not ours, mine. I walked from room to room, noting what I'd take and what I'd leave. The furniture stayed. The dishes stayed. The framed photos stayed because meaning had already drained out of them. Only essentials went into a single duffel bag: clothes, documents, the signed papers, and the phone charger I knew she'd look for later. I didn't text her. I didn't warn her. I turned off my location, muted all notifications, and drove the car out of the neighborhood the same way I had driven it out of the bar that night. Steady, quiet, certain. I didn't know where I was going. That was the point. I needed distance without direction, clarity without destination. I checked into a small business hotel 20 minutes away, the kind of place no one thinks to look for someone like me. I turned my phone face down on the bedside table and watched it light up with her first call, then another, then a string of messages that shifted from casual to confused to something closer to anxious. I didn't answer. I let the silence do what words never could. By evening, she had called 6 times. Adam called twice. I watched the names appear and vanish without touching the screen. They weren't reaching out to me. They were reaching out to maintain the story they'd built. And I had already stepped outside of it. That night, for the first time in a long time, I slept easily. I woke before sunrise, the kind of quiet hour when decisions land cleanly. The hotel room was still, my duffel bag in the corner, my phone face down the way I'd left it. She hadn't called overnight, which told me everything. Panic had shifted into strategy. She was probably building a narrative already, one where I was overreacting, dramatic, fragile. HR instincts never sleep. I showered, got dressed, and drove the car to the office but parked several blocks away so no one would notice. I didn't go inside. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted clarity, and I knew exactly where to find it. Adam had always treated rules like suggestions. It was part of his charm, the thing people forgave because he made them laugh in meetings. But charm doesn't erase digital footprints. I sat in the car with my laptop open, breathing steadily as I accessed a shared project folder he'd once asked me to help him fix. He never changed his password afterward. That was his arrogance, not my intrusion. What I found wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to shift the ground under him. Expense reports slightly padded, hours billed on days he wasn't working, small inconsistencies that could be explained away on their own, but not when arranged in a perfect sequence. It didn't surprise me. People who cross lines personally rarely stay meticulous professionally. I gathered the inconsistencies into a single clean file, labeled neutrally. No commentary, no accusations, just numbers lined up exactly as they occurred. And then I sent it, anonymously, to our compliance department. Not out of revenge, not to punish him, but because structures fall naturally when pressure is applied to the right beam. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Truth works on its own timetable. After sending the file, I closed the laptop and leaned back in the seat. The sun had started to rise, catching the windshield with a pale reflection. I felt no rush, no thrill, just the quiet satisfaction of a line finally settling where it belonged. By noon, I heard the first ripple through the office chat groups. Adam had been pulled into a meeting. Unexpected. Closed door. Urgent. I didn't celebrate. I simply watched from a distance as the story they built for themselves began to shift without me lifting my voice once. I didn't go back to the hotel right away. I drove aimlessly for a while, letting the city move around me. By the time I finally returned, the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows across the parking lot. My phone, still face down on the nightstand, lit up with a stream of notifications the moment I walked in. I didn't check them. I already knew what they were. When people lose control of a narrative, they start reaching for any version that keeps them centered. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the silence stretch until it felt almost physical. Around 6 in the evening, I finally turned the phone over. The messages came in clusters. Her coworkers had tried calling me, then stopped. My wife had shifted from casual check-ins to pointed questions, then to clipped warnings about how this looked. She wrote that we needed to talk before rumors spread at work. She wrote that disappearing was unprofessional. She didn't mention the marriage once. Not directly. She never did when she felt cornered. Then came the message that made me pause. Not from her, but from one of her closest friends, a woman named Danielle. She said she'd seen my wife in the break room earlier, pacing, near tears. Not from guilt, from fear of losing her image. Danielle didn't defend her. She didn't scold me. She simply said, "People are starting to ask questions. She's not handling it well." And then, after a beat, "You really thought no one would notice?" I reread that line twice. It didn't sound accusatory. It sounded like someone finally saying out loud what had been obvious to everyone except the two people creating the mess. Later that night, I saw a photo posted on a colleague's story. My wife sitting alone at a table in the office kitchen, hands wrapped around a Starbucks cup, like she was holding on to something that could still steady her. No Adam. No circle around her. Just empty chairs and a woman whose confidence had slipped without an audience to protect it. I didn't reach out. I didn't comment. I didn't let the moment pull me in emotionally. I watched it the way you watch a chart correct itself after months of irregularities, quietly, almost clinically. She wasn't unraveling because of what I did. She was unraveling because I stopped doing anything at all. I drove back to the house 2 days later, not because I wanted to see her, but because I needed to collect a few things I hadn't bothered grabbing the first time. The neighborhood looked the same, but the silence felt different, as if something had shifted in the air without my participation. Her car was parked crooked in the driveway, like she'd come home distracted. The porch light was still on though it was midday. She never forgot things like that before. I unlocked the door and stepped inside without announcing myself. The house felt unfamiliar, as if my absence had rearranged the energy of the rooms. She was in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a half-eaten Costco rotisserie chicken in front of her, picking at it absent-mindedly. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, and the same Starbucks cup from earlier sat near her elbow, cold and untouched. She didn't hear me at first. She was staring at her iPhone, scrolling through something with a kind of frantic focus, the kind that belongs to people who've lost their script and are looking for a new one. When she finally noticed me, she froze, but not in the way I expected. Not angry, not relieved, just disoriented. Like she couldn't figure out how I fit into the version of the story she'd built for herself these past few days. She said she'd been worried, that disappearing like that wasn't healthy communication, that she deserved an explanation. She kept her voice low, the way people do when they're afraid the truth might echo. I didn't respond. I walked past her to the hallway closet and grabbed the last items I needed. The duffel bag filled easily. She followed me, asking if this was really necessary, if we couldn't talk like adults. But her voice shook at the end of each sentence. She wasn't asking for clarity. She was asking for control. I could feel her watching me the way someone watches a stranger who looks vaguely familiar. She kept waiting for me to break the silence, to reset the dynamic to what it used to be. That was her comfort zone, me explaining, me soothing, me carrying the emotional weight so she didn't have to. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even cold. I was simply unreachable. When I zipped up the bag, she finally whispered that she didn't understand what had changed. I didn't answer. The truth was simple. I had. She followed me into the living room as if proximity alone could slow the distance growing between us. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that exposes every small sound. Her uneven breathing, the soft buzz of the refrigerator, the faint hum from the Hulu login screen she'd left open earlier. She kept trying to position herself in front of me, to force eye contact, to pull me back into a conversation I never agreed to have. She said we needed clarity, that disappearing wasn't fair, that I was acting like a stranger. But the truth was simpler than anything she imagined. I wasn't acting. I had already stepped into a different version of myself, one she didn't recognize. I walked into the living room and set my duffel bag by the door. She hovered near the couch, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold, even though the thermostat hadn't changed. She said she just wanted to understand. But her voice carried something else, fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control over the image she curated so carefully at work, online, with friends. I saw her glance at the coffee table, where her iPhone sat face down next to another half-finished Starbucks drink. She kept checking it between sentences, waiting for a message that could tell her how to fix the situation without taking responsibility for any part of it. I sat on the edge of the armchair, not leaning back, not getting comfortable. She was standing, talking faster now, insisting nothing happened with Adam, that people were probably stirring things up at work, that Melissa had always been dramatic. But she didn't say any of it with conviction. She said it like someone on stage reciting lines she hadn't rehearsed well. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge anything. I watched her explain a story to herself, not to me. Eventually she stopped talking, realizing I hadn't spoken a single word since I walked in. She asked why I wouldn't say anything, why I wouldn't at least tell her what I was thinking. I stood slowly, picked up the duffel bag, and met her eyes just long enough for her to understand the shift. There was nothing to confront, nothing to argue, nothing to fix. I had already left the conversation she was trying to have, and she was only now noticing she was talking to someone who was no longer in the room with her. I didn't slam the door. I didn't rush. I walked out with the duffel bag over my shoulder, steady and silent, the same way I'd walked out of the bar the night she joked that our marriage was trash. She followed me onto the porch, still talking, still trying to negotiate with a version of me that no longer existed. I didn't turn around. I walked to the car, unlocked it, and set the bag inside. The simplicity of the motion seemed to hit her harder than anything I could have said. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, she was standing in the middle of the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the spot where the car had been. Her posture wasn't angry anymore. It was unsettled, like she was finally seeing the fault lines she'd been creating for months. I drove without destination again, letting the road help me sort the final pieces. She wasn't losing me. She'd lost the version of me she depended on, the one who smoothed things over, who carried emotional weight, who justified her behavior to himself just to keep the peace. That man was gone, and she felt it more deeply than she ever felt my presence. Later that evening, I checked my phone. Not messages, just the social ripple. People talk when a story shifts. Danielle had posted a photo from work. My wife sitting alone at a conference table, staring down at a cold Starbucks cup like she was bracing for impact. The caption wasn't directed at anyone, but the meaning was sharp enough to cut. Actions always catch up. I wasn't involved. I didn't comment. I didn't even like the post. But watching the scene unfold from a distance felt like watching a building finally lean under its own flawed architecture. Nothing explosive, just inevitable. The collapse continued the next day. A coworker messaged me privately to say Adam had been escorted out after a compliance meeting went sideways. No details, just the fact that he'd left looking pale and shaken. My wife hadn't shown up to the morning stand-up either. The absence of both of them told its own story, one I didn't need to narrate. By afternoon, another update. She'd tried to gather a few colleagues to clear the air, but no one stayed. People weren't choosing sides. They were stepping back, letting distance reveal what noise usually hides. Her unraveling didn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked quiet. And for her, that silence was the worst kind of collapse. I didn't plan on seeing her again that week. I thought the distance would keep things clean, final, simple. But endings have a way of circling back, not for closure, but for clarity. On Friday evening, I drove back to the neighborhood one last time to drop off a document she'd need for the legal side of things. I could have emailed it. I didn't. Something told me finishing this in person mattered, not emotionally, but structurally. Loose threads invite noise. Her car was already in the driveway, parked straighter than before, as if she'd tried to compose herself for the world even if she couldn't compose herself inside. The porch light was on again, though it wasn't dark. It felt symbolic, an invitation she didn't know how to offer with words. When I walked in, she was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by open boxes she'd dragged out from the closet. Old photos, souvenirs, random things we never bothered labeling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She just looked stunned, like someone who'd walked into a room they once owned and suddenly realized it no longer belonged to them. She said my name softly, not demanding this time, not correcting, not negotiating. She asked if this was really the life we had arrived at. She asked when she stopped seeing me, when she stopped noticing the way I changed. She said she didn't recognize herself lately, and for the first time, her voice didn't sound like a speech rehearsed in the mirror. I set the folder on the table. She saw it, swallowed hard, and nodded. No fight, no excuses, just the weight of her own choices settling into the room. She whispered that she didn't want it to end like this. Not with silence. Not with distance she hadn't earned the right to close. She asked what I needed to hear, what she could say, what could still be repaired. I didn't sit down. I didn't reach for her. I just held her gaze long enough for her to understand that what broke wasn't sudden, and what changed wasn't reversible. I told her, calmly, that I didn't disappear. I simply stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. Then I stepped back, leaving the space open, not as an invitation, not as forgiveness, but as a line drawn clearly at last. Where she went from there was her story. Where I went was finally mine. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.